Everyone, it is March 6th, 2024. This is a public meeting of the Portland Committee on Community Engaged Policing, Settlement and Policy Subcommittee. And let's get started with introductions. Kip, do you want to get us started and pass it on?
Yeah, hi. My name's Kip Silverman. I use he, him pronouns. I am one half of the Settlement and Policy Subcommittee co-chairs, and I'll hand it off to Byron.
Thank you, Kip. Byron Vaughn, second half of the Settlement and Policy Subcommittee.
And how about Carrie?
Hi, Carrie Driver. I use she, her pronouns, and I'm on the Community Engagement Subcommittee. I will hand it off to Ashley.
PCCEP Ashley. Oh, okay, that is PCCEP Ashley. Okay, because I wasn't sure if she had joined us yet. Let's go to Tia. Looks like Ashley's having some tech challenges. Oh, okay. Looks like PCCEP Ashley is not here yet, and Ashley from PPB is with us. So that's great to know. But yeah, let's go to Tia.
Tia.
Tia, you're on mute.
Hello, my name is Tia Palafox. My pronouns are she, her, and I'm the co-chair of the Community Engagement Subcommittee. Thank you. Has Leslie gone?
Hi, everyone. My name is Leslie Martinez. I've been a PCCEP member almost 2 years now, about a year and a half, and I am a member of the Community Engagement Subcommittee as well as the Policy Subcommittee. Am I the last one?
Nathan.
I'm also here.
Nathan.
Oh,
Good evening, everyone. Nathan Castle, he, him pronouns, member of PCCEP and the subcommittee.
Great. I think that's all of our PCCEP members here for now. And now let's jump into introductions from any city folks here, PPB, DOJ, and feel free to just jump in. I'll start. I'm Dory Grabinski, PCCEP project manager.
Hi, everybody. Stephanie Howard. I work in the mayor's office. I use she, her pronouns. Glad to see you all.
Good evening, folks. Mary Claire Buckley from the Portland Police Bureau. Nice to see you.
I'm Sarah Ames, she, her pronouns, Deputy City Attorney.
Hi, everyone. I'm Jill Weir. I'm with the policy team with the Portland Police Bureau.
I thought I saw Avi out there.
Hi, yeah, this is Avi. I'm PCCEP staff. Happy to see you all. I normally don't say anything because my job is to sit here and be silent, but I'm saying hi. Welcome.
Hi, Samir Kanal, Advisory Boards and Commissions Manager for the Community Safety Division.
All right. And let's get slides again. Okay. Leslie, do you want to read our community agreements?
let me unmute myself. Listen actively and respectfully. Share airtime. Be present and open to new information and perspectives. Assume positive intent. Respect each other. respect the group, speak your own truth, communicate directly, honestly, and respectfully, ask questions to clarify, call out bias, be okay with ambiguity.
Thanks,
Hey,
Leslie.
Dory, I was gonna be going through all this. That's okay, though. I didn't know.
Go for it,
I didn't know.
Byron.
No, that's okay. Continue on. I just wanted to make sure, I
Yeah, no, I
wasn't.
think this is you. Go for it.
Overview of today's meetings, updates from 6:05 p.m. PPB's policy development and directive review at 6:15. PCEP's codification work group information from 7:15. And then we'll have open comment from 7:50 until 8 o'clock. Here's our updates. Becoming a PCEP member, please, if you know anybody out there, LGBTQ, BIPOC, Pacific Islander, anybody, Native, we really appreciate it if you could reach out and do some community outreach for us. I would really appreciate that. Am I going too fast, Dory?
No, you are all good.
Okay. Now we have the Independent Monitor Community Forum on March 12th. We have the 3 finalists who will participate in the community forum on Tuesday, March 12th, 2024 of this year from 6 to 8 p.m. Hopefully everybody that's here, all 33, can be present. This forum will host in hybrid format to allow for both virtual and in-person participation at Leah Hing's room of the Portland building. Do everybody know where that's at? Maybe we can put the address into the chat if nobody know where that's at. Each candidate will provide a 15-minute presentation of their team and their proposal, followed by a facilitated Q&A with the community. PCEP is hosting a PSR town hall, which I'm pretty sure everybody that's on this call is familiar with. Thank you for your support. It's been great. It can shows what when people put themselves behind something that it'll really work. It really gets people's attention. So March 27th from 6 to 8:30 p.m. is when this PSR town hall will be. Info session it will be, and town hall designed to inform PCEP recommendations in support of PSR. Let me repeat that again. Information session and town hall designed to inform PCEP recommendations in support of PSR. And the third one is hybrid in person. Venue will be announced next week, so please keep an eye out for it. We are on Instagram and Facebook. And we have the contact survey work group updates. I'm not too sure.
So this is we're going to Carrie for this.
Okay, please, Carrie.
Thank you. Stephanie Howard is here as well from Community Safety, and please chime in, Stephanie, to add to or edit anything that I'm saying. So as the representative for PCEP on the work group, I went to the first meeting last Thursday, and there were representatives from Community Safety, from procurement and auditing, from the police department and PPA, in addition to us, as well as the training arm had an individual represented there as well. We just are beginning this process, so the point of the task, the work group, is to write a request for proposal, an RFP, for a vendor that will provide us with the technology and services that would allow a program to enable the police to do contact surveys. In the meeting on Thursday, the 29th of February, we talked about the scope and whether it should just be the police or all first responders. And we talked about, what impact that would have on our program. We're meeting again on Thursday, the 14th of March. And at that point, we will further work on the scope, and we'll also look at timing. Some of the things that we did discuss was that we would like to focus on a pilot program initially, to allow everybody to get used to the system and make sure that the program we're developing is meeting the needs before we launch into a full-scale thing. Stephanie, would you like to add anything to that?
I think that's a great summary, Carrie. I just want to say I was really encouraged by the discussion, and I think it's a group that's really interested in wanting to put forward an RFP that is thoughtful about all of the needs here, and really valued the input from PCCEP through Carrie and through the Training Advisory Council representative who is there. So it was I'm very excited about it. Looking forward to the next meeting.
Any questions for Carrie, PCCEP members? And Byron or Kip, we're back to you, I think. Oh,
Okay, thank you. Question voters will be asked: should Portland change police oversight board authority to recommend but not impose discipline? Amend investigatory authority, revise membership budget requirements? There's a lot of questions in what was just asked. In 2020, voters added a new community police oversight board to charter to impose discipline, include termination on police employees. Bullet number 2, investigate certain misconduct complaints, other complaints as they see fit. Bullet number 3, recommend police policies focused on community concerns. And the last one is include board members from diversity communities, particularly with systemic racism, mentally illness, substance abuse, and substance abuse experience. Excuse me. In 2020, voters added new community police oversight board to charter to bullet 1 is prohibit board members who are current law enforcement employees and 8 immediate family members or former law enforcement employees. Bullet number 2 is operate with a budget proportionally to 5% of police bureau's operating budget. Bullet number 3 is exercise independent judgment executing assigned duties. If measured, approved, amended, board will. If measured, approved, amended, board will recommend discipline to the police chief who makes all discipline decisions, subject only to city administrator approval. Number 2 is investigate certain misconduct complaints, eliminate authority to investigate other complaints as they see fit. Include board members from diverse communities, eliminate emphasis on certain experiences, remove probation on law enforcement employees, family members. And eliminate 5% budget requirement, council sets budget. Eliminate language regarding independent judgment, non-interference. This is a new bullet. Issue annual report, recommending recruiting, retention, training program improvements. Bullet number 2 is summarizing complaints with anonymous complaints, subjects, witnesses. Do any of the PCCEP members have anything or want to go back on the slide? Or should I stop right here, Dory? Or is Ash or
those are all the slides for this.
okay. I'm done. No questions or comments from PCCEP members? Okay.
Okay, I don't know. Was Ashley Lancaster able to join the call?
Yeah.
Okay.
Hi, Dory. I joined by phone. Are you able to hear me?
Yeah, we can.
Yes.
Sorry
thank
about
you.
that. It's one of those instances where we've switched to Teams and now I have forgotten how to work Zoom. I don't know what's going on, so I apologize. But I see that Dan Handelman has a question. I don't want to overstep.
Sure. Yeah, we can take Dan's question.
Oh, hi, thanks. I actually was more of a comment about the ballot measure that that your co-chair just introduced to everybody. I was on the Police Accountability Commission, which we spent 20 months working on fleshing out the original ballot measure that's now part of the city charter. And, the Citizen Review Committee, the current oversight board, such as it is, had a meeting on February 7, which is the day that the PPA initially introduced their ballot measure. And then that one, the original one, got found unconstitutional. So they introduced a second one on February 20. And on February 21, that's when Heidi Brown came and talked to you about what's going on about implementing the new oversight board. It was not mentioned at either one of those meetings that the PPA had filed these ballot measures. And I just thought it would be interesting for you to know that information. I mean, it's not part of the negotiations with the contract. It's public information, but it wasn't shared with either you or with the CRC. So I thought that was of
interest. Thanks, Dan. Sorry. Any other comments on that section? Barb?
Yeah, so I just want to be clear that PPA thing is it a done deal? It's going on the ballot, and then it's an all or nothing thing with all of the points that Byron read off? Am I understanding that correctly?
I'm gonna defer to.
Is there a lawyer in the room?
I can jump in just really quickly if it's helpful. No, I believe they still in the process need to gather signatures in order to get it on the ballot. But I would definitely recommend more discussion about it. And I would recommend, if PCCEP wants to hear from the union directly, they should invite them. I think they would come, and I think that would be a worthwhile discussion for PCCEP to have with the people who, put this together. So I would encourage that, and I'm happy to facilitate that in any way that I can.
Stephanie, I have a clarifying question about that suggestion. In PCCEP's capacity as public officials, are those sorts of discussions things that they are able to have? And Sarah, it's a question for you as well.
Yeah, I think absolutely they are able to have these discussions. Sarah, do you just?
Yes, the prohibition on that applies to public officials, including appointed board and commission members. Under state law, you are not allowed to advocate for or against any ballot measure. So you have to be careful. You can, host informational forums and not take a position. That does put a pretty high burden on, members of PCCEP to kind of listen and facilitate information sharing without expressing their own views. Obviously when you're not sitting as PCCEP members and you're not in your official capacity, if you're out, doing your own thing, you can take any position or work for any campaigns, anyone running for office that you like. But while you're in, in a meeting or, as a PCCEP member acting in your official capacity, you have to be very careful to be neutral and not oppose. It's a state law, and it applies to me and Stephanie and Dory and to the PCCEP members.
But yes, with all of those caveats, I guess I would just say that for purposes of facilitating a community conversation on the issue without taking a position, I think PCCEP, if it's interested, can certainly do that.
Thank you.
PCCEP members, do you all have any questions about that? I asked my question.
No, but I do like the idea of bringing like the PPA to discuss and kind of present the case in this this committee, just to educate.
Yeah, and I believe from what I heard, and you guys can correct me, Sarah, and that we should be able to facilitate the conversation, ask questions, clarifications, get feedback. We just can't advocate for a position one way or another.
So a recommendation around this would be out of the question.
Yes.
That only when we're civilians, I guess, but formally, no. Yeah.
Well, as a
Yeah,
PCEP,
that's
like, you
PCEP,
know,
yeah.
yeah, it's a PCEP thing, the recommendations, so.
Right.
I would think that would be a lot more constructive than us coming there trying to bring in opinions and then everything gets murky where you can't make a decision.
Hi everyone. Ashley, sorry I was a little late today. But no, this makes sense to me. I work in government and have worked in nonprofits, so I've kind of understood the like just there's always some clear lines, you know, whatever hat you're playing. So I do have a question though, since this is here. I mean, for example, there is sort of a community event this weekend around community and policing conversations over at PSU. It's PSU. And I was just curious, I know some PCEP members, we wanted to go and attend. And I know it's not like on a measure or any kind of like candidate or anything, but there's going to be this kind of like once maybe, you know, a conversation leaning to a certain side around policing in the community. I plan to show up, but I don't plan to really speak with my PCEP hat. I don't think that, you know, it's not an official place, but I am coming with like some knowledge and experience, you know, speaking in a community conversation around policing. And so I don't know, just my question of like, yeah, like where are those lines sort of drawn for PCEP members, even out in our own private life, but in this like community conversation where, you know, we might talk about being a PCEP member, but not talking for PCEP. You know, we can always make that statement. I know. If anybody has the same question or anything, or who can answer that maybe.
Yeah, I did forward Dory this afternoon some information that and a link to the manual on this that the Secretary of State's office puts out. And it's very clear that if you are acting in your official capacity, if you say, hi, I'm a member of PCEP and this is how I know this, or you're, you know, representing yourself as having knowledge because you're a member of PCEP, that's one thing. If you are participating, I mean, many of you are on this group and were appointed because you care about these issues and you've been active in the community on these issues already. And we do not expect you to like give up that role in your personal life to serve on PCEP. So I think that, you know, just, you know, I don't know if that helps you think about the lines. You can also look at the, you know, the manual also has some very, you know, specific examples, for example, like it applies to public employees. And so when they can, you know, when they can take off their I'm a public employee hat and be a member of the community. And so I think looking at those links that Dory can share with you, or you can Google, are probably, you know, helpful.
No, yeah, definitely. And I will review that email again.
And of course, it is specifically not about issue advocacy. It's about things that are on or off the ballot. Individuals, candidate campaigns, once they file for office, and then ballot measures once they're filed for, you know, signature collection, which is where this one is. So those are things you got to watch out for if you are wearing your official hat in any way or introducing yourself as having some experience and authority because of your official role.
Yeah, no, that makes sense.
Great. All right, everyone. I think in the interest of time, we're going to move on for now, but please hold on to your comments for our open public comment later on. Okay, and now let's move into sorry about my voice, everyone. Our next section. And for this part, I think we'll hand it over to Ashley Lancaster, the PPV Policy Director. And thanks for being with us, Ashley.
Thanks for having me, Dory, and I'll try to turn on my camera here just so folks can see my face. I will turn it off because it's been glitchy, but wanted to say hi so you can see my face. Thank you for having me, and I'm wondering, Dory, is it okay if I share my screen?
Yeah, absolutely. Let us give you access.
Or if it's easier, I can quickly send the slide deck to you. That's not a problem.
Just a second here. You should have it now.
Okay, perfect. Thank you. Let's see. Let's pull this up. Okay, can everyone see the PowerPoint? Yes, I'm seeing nods, head nods. Let's start this. Okay, so quick introduction. I'm Ashley Lancaster, again, the policy director for PPB. I've been with the Bureau. I joined the Bureau in the fall of 2016, so I'm approaching my 8-year work anniversary. I've worked in my current capacity as the policy lead, or the lead of the policy development team, for about 4 years now. Also comprising the team is Jill Weir. She introduced herself earlier. Jill is a non-sworn analyst with our team who joined the Bureau in October of 2023. We also have Officer Peter Brown, who is unfortunately not on the call. He's sick today, but he's temporarily assigned to our team and serves in an analytical research and writing capacity as well, and brings just operational and practical perspective. And then lastly, from the City Attorney's Office, Senior Deputy City Attorney Anika Bent-Alpert is provides our legal analysis and legal reviews of our directives, and liaises with her colleagues in the City Attorney's Office if there are some of our policies that we're reviewing have any other legal implications that are outside of her area of expertise. So if there is a risk management implication or ADA compliance issue, she touches base with those attorneys in her office who bring that legal expertise. Before we get into our process, I think that's the why behind my presence here, our directive review process, I wanted to just offer a little information about the Bureau's past practices with regard to directive review and development. So prior to the Bureau forming a dedicated team, the policy development team in 2016, it's my understanding that the Bureau took more of a decentralized approach to this work. There was no dedicated staff, no dedicated team. Bureau members or functional areas might have been assigned directives to develop, with presumably some level of legal review being performed by the City Attorney's Office, and then administrative staff in the Bureau would compile and maintain all of the directives. About a year before I joined the Bureau, the PPB did hire an analyst to begin to formalize this process a bit more. I heard one staff member, which was a lot to take on for that individual. And it's my understanding that they ended up functioning as more of a traffic controller and maintaining more of a hybrid approach of farming policies out to individual functional areas or responsibility units for them to develop policy, and then performing more of an editing and high-level management role rather than performing the research and managing the entire process internally themselves. So then in 2016, again, when I joined the team, the Bureau increased its capacity, dedicated staffing resources, and I believe that was born out of the settlement agreement, actually the hiring of a couple of analysts to perform these duties. And that really had a significant impact on our ability to just bring more continuity and consistency to the process, to put in place best practices around research and having dedicated staff that can look into the case law, other jurisdictions, identify appropriate stakeholders, et cetera, and just manage this process in a more centralized way. And I should have said at the outset, this is intended to be conversational. Feel free to interrupt me if you have any questions. I will not be offended. This is not meant to be formal and me sort of talking at you. So if you have questions as we navigate the slide deck, please feel free to jump in. So that's a little bit about the history of how we used to do it, how we currently do the process now. It's important, I think, before we dive into the steps involved in our process, to talk about what a directive or a policy is. I will be using those words interchangeably. Directives and policies, in my mind, are essentially the same thing for the purposes of this conversation and the work that I do. But it's important to define what a directive is, and then we'll get into the purpose of directives from my vantage point, at least. So some of you may be familiar with our directive, Directive 10, Directives Review and Development Process. Very creative name there, but clearly outlines our process, speaks to each of the steps in the process, and gives a little more insight and depth peek into what goes into the respective processes, which we'll get to here in a moment. But that directive also defines what a directive is, and that's a PPB document that addresses the rules, policies, and procedures for a particular topic. When I think about the purpose of directives, I think there are countless purposes, but these are the primary purposes that jump out or stand out in my mind. Directives are designed to establish the rules of engagement for all Bureau members. They don't just apply to our sworn members, they apply to non-sworn members as well. So you will find, as you're navigating our directives, they tend to be geared toward the law enforcement side of things, but I am also held accountable to those same directives. Our directives also speak to PPB's values and our approaches or aspirational goals with regard to a particular area. So just in terms of how our directives are organized, and I'll touch on this a little bit later, we have a reference section that sort of outlines all of the relevant laws and governing documents or sources that pertain to a particular subject area. We have terms defined in a definition section. We then have what is called the policy section and then a procedure section. That policy section is in alignment here with the second point under the purpose here, which is speaking to again, what the Bureau aspires to be in a particular area, the work that we aspire to do in that particular context. So that section of the policy tends to be a little more aspirational and focused on our goals and objectives.
Ashley,
yeah,
we lost your presentation share.
Yeah, I wasn't sure if that was. That was why I raised my hand. I wanted to say, Ashley, that we don't see the presentation anymore.
Thank you. Let me see if I can bring that back up. Not sure why that happened. Okay.
Thank you.
Are we back in there? Perfect. Okay, we'll jump ahead. So focusing on that last bullet under purpose, again, these are I think the three primary purposes of the directive. What's often lost on folks internally, I think, when we're working these developing these directives, is that another primary audience besides the Bureau members who are directly impacted and held accountable to these policies is our community. And so another important purpose of directives from my vantage point is to inform the public of what our practices currently are with regard to a particular subject. So establishing the rules of engagement for all Bureau members and creating accountability standards, addressing our values, and keeping the public apprised of what we're doing in a particular context. So when we're developing directives, we have a few objectives that we aim for during that process. Of course, and perhaps most importantly, is ensuring that our directives are consistent with current law and other governing sources. So that might include city code or city council resolutions, the DOJ settlement agreement. That's a pretty important goal to keep in mind as we're developing our policies. We also look to other jurisdictions to see what their current practices are to make a determination about whether or not those are effective practices, if we want to align our policies in a similar manner to mirror those quote unquote best practices, or even try to exceed what's happening in the industry as well. But other jurisdictional policies serve as a good reference point, and I'll touch on this a bit later as well. But a good starting point for us when we're trying to determine where we want to go with the policies, just see how other agencies are working in that regard. It's also quite important for us to ensure that our policies are clear and, to the extent possible, concise. I chuckle when I say that because we have, as many of you know, policies that are 20 pages long, and so we don't often succeed on the conciseness objective. But the goal here is to ensure that both Bureau members and community members alike understand our policies, because it is through understanding that we are able to hold members accountable. Right, having Bureau members who are both enforcing the policies and applying the policies, understand what the policies mean is critical to the accountability piece. Finally, we also try to set out to avoid our policies having disparate impact or outcomes. So one example of this is the Bureau's practice of no longer making traffic stops for minor traffic or administrative violations. Right, there's research tied to certain marginalized communities being disproportionately stopped. And so that's one example of how we might shift a practice to avoid a disparate outcome. All right, so when developing policy, we have those objectives, we have those purposes in mind, but we're also faced with several challenges. I think one of the primary difficulties in developing policy is the ever-evolving standards versus which comes up against our protracted process. And by that, I mean, we just have a very lengthy policy development review process. I think on average, our policies can take anywhere from 6 to 12 months to develop, depending on whether or not there are connections to the DOJ settlement agreement. It may take a little longer, but it's a fairly lengthy process. And in some ways, that's good because it does allow for more meaningful interactions with stakeholders in the development of the process. We have 2 universal review and public comment periods, which I'll touch on here in a moment. I wouldn't want to do away with that or with either of those periods or to shorten them in any way. So it's almost unavoidable to have a protracted process, but that makes our ability to be immediately responsive to shifts in the law or technological advances or shifts in training. It makes that a little difficult to be nimble in the development of policy. Another challenge is, when we're looking to other jurisdictional policies as a reference point, again, to see how other agencies are policing in a certain context, it's difficult to marry that with the fact that policing is a very local issue. There are very specific local community public safety needs. And so having to balance the, what the quote unquote, again, industry best practice might be, or how most jurisdictions are handling a particular issue against individualized local public safety needs poses a bit of a challenge when you're developing policy. We also have to navigate competing stakeholder interests. So there are a lot of folks who are involved in the development of our policies, community members, Bureau members, Chief's Office, the Police Commissioner, council, staff, excuse me, the DOJ, and everybody has a different set of interests. And on top of that, we have to yield an output that is, again, clear and concise and makes sense to members. Because, right, it is through that we are able to hold folks accountable. So it's kind of a difficult process to navigate when you're trying to give all stakeholders a voice, but yield a product that's actionable and enforceable. Another, I would say, pretty significant challenge is navigating when to create bright line rules or to be overly prescriptive in policy versus allowing for discretion. I think there are certainly circumstances under which policies need to be prescriptive. A great example of that is our use of force policy and the constitutional force standard, right? So the Supreme Court made a determination about when an officer's use of force is reasonable. It must be objectively reasonable based on the totality of the circumstances. That's a clear, bright line rule. If an officer violates that rule, they are violating your constitutional rights. However, within that same subject area, a good example of why the need for discretion is also necessary. Prior to our current force policy, the industry standard was to have what was called a force continuum. And basically this was a chart that, you know, directed an officer to use a particular type of force when they encountered a certain behavior or a person with a particular weapon. So if I encounter a person who is going hands-on with me, then perhaps I would be permitted to use my taser. If they have a knife, then I can use my gun. And it was very prescriptive. And I think the reason why the industry shifted from that practice, and I offer those two examples again as this sort of dilemma of recognizing when to be prescriptive versus having more discretionary policies. I offer that as an example because the continuum completely eliminated any sort of decision-making or an assessment of the situation to consider the totality of the circumstances. And so it was highly problematic and rigid. And so there's an opportunity here to both have the bright line rule, but to allow for discretion and recognizing that policing, the very nature of policing requires making very case-specific decisions. And so a lot of our policies will have bright line rules, such as the one that I just outlined, but in other areas we'll just establish what I call the bumpers, so a range of standards or practices or approaches in which an officer can undertake to ultimately arrive at a particular conclusion. Lastly, I would say one of our most significant challenges is just process engagement in general. Both community members, bureau members, it's very difficult to cast a wide enough net to reach everyone who's impacted by our policies. I think that we continue to at least identify ways in which we can improve that and increase our outreach and engagement, but it continues to be a struggle largely due to capacity issues. We're a small team with a pretty full workload, but it's just, so, you know, it's a little difficult both with the limitations in our ability to reach more people, but also recognizing that we have this process in place that has some flexibility, but at some point we do need to produce a policy. So that poses a bit of a constraint there. So before I get into just sort of a description or an explanation of each of the steps that are involved in our process, does anybody have any questions so far? And I can't see anything, so I'm relying on you to jump in if you have a question.
Yeah, and I can call on folks if they have questions, but so far there's no raised hands.
Okay, thank you so much.
You're welcome.
So continuing with our process, the first piece there that you see on the screen, process initiation, by that I just mean why do we review a policy or why do we create a policy? So there are a few sources that contribute to that. With new policy, there might be an area where we have a gap in policies, so we have no guidance on a particular subject. An example of that might be our directive, I believe the number is 320. It's our directive on the Bureau's obligation to report potential exculpatory information. So that policy is relatively new. We developed it in the last 3 to 4 years, and that was born out of an IPR recommendation. Not all jurisdictions have quote unquote Brady policies, is sort of the colloquial name for that. There was a gap in policy that IPR identified, and so we created a policy in response to that. the DOJ may direct us to develop a policy. There could be a need as a result of the change in law or new law or participation in a program. So that's sort of the reason behind why we would create a new policy. With regard to our existing policies, of which there are about, I think at this point we have about 180 or so policies. They're on review, fixed review schedules. So our 40 or so policies that pertain to the DOJ settlement agreement, those would be our use of force policies, our mental health related policies, policies pertaining to accountability, so administrative and criminal investigations, et cetera. Those policies are on annual review cycles. We review those every year in consultation with the DOJ. All of the remaining directives, the 130 or 140 or so directives, are supposed to be on 2-year review cycles. We've been able to do a better job of tackling those and trying to stay on top of those schedules. But again, our capacity affects our ability to do that. Sometimes there are just issues that take more priority and impede our ability to stick to that schedule. But generally, we're getting better about maintaining that standard 2-year, 1-year and 2-year review cycle for DOJ and non-DOJ policies. So that starts the process. Once we, just for the purposes of this example, we'll pretend as if we're talking about an existing policy. So let's say that we have a directive that's up for its regularly scheduled 2-year review. We will start the process by posting it for first universal review and public comment. We post it to our website for 30 days, and I will show, I'll do a little demonstration on how to access this information and access the surveys once I conclude the presentation. But we post our current policy as a means by which we're conveying to the public, this is our current practice. We want you to weigh in on what we are currently doing, poke holes in it, tell us if there are other ways we could be doing this. That's your opportunity to provide feedback on what we're currently doing in a particular context. After that 30-day period, we shift into the next step, which is executive reconciliation. That's just kind of a fancy, I don't even know the genesis of that phrase. Maybe Mary Claire can let me know down the line. I think it's related to the DOJ. That's a fancy way of essentially saying that's the phase at which we are performing our research, looking at other jurisdictions, meeting with stakeholders and SMEs, engaging community groups, engaging community members, et cetera, and looking at the comments that we received during the first universal review and public comment period with the goal of informing the development of a new draft. So that executive reconciliation period isn't a fixed amount of time like the public comment period. It can take 1 month, it could take 6 months, just sort of depends on what the particular need of that directive is. It might require us to engage more people, more stakeholders, more SMEs, and so it might take a little longer. Once we've developed an updated draft of the policy, so we've taken the public comments during the first universal review period, we've incorporated the feedback from subject matter experts and other stakeholders. We then post an updated draft for second universal review and public comment. And that is the Bureau's way of saying, members of the public, Bureau members, these are our proposed practices in this context. So you've had an opportunity to weigh in on what we're already doing. We want you to take a look at what we're now proposing that we do with regard to a particular subject. At this point, during the second universal review, we try to keep the draft conceptually as close to being finalized as possible. However, we do still make changes if necessary after the second universal review period. So posting it for second universal review doesn't necessarily mean that it is the end of the line for members of the public. We might receive feedback during that public comment period that necessitates making further changes. Maybe there's a glaring oversight on our part, or maybe there's something that's highly problematic about what we're proposing. So we're certainly open at that point to make further changes if necessary. And we would do that during the second executive reconciliation period. Once we incorporate feedback from the second public comment period, and if need be, touch base with appropriate stakeholders, chief's office, etc., we send a quote unquote final draft to the union for their review. And I've been asked the question before, why can't the union just participate in the other phases of this process that are open to all stakeholders, so namely universal review and second universal review. And the unions are contractually entitled to a 15 business day review of the final, or as close to finalized version of the directive. So that's why their review occurs kind of later in the process, because the draft at that point is pretty close to being finalized, and that just aligns with the agreement between the unions and the city. If it's a DOJ policy, after union review, we would then submit it to the DOJ for their consideration. I will say what's not reflected in this very linear depiction here is that we often work with the DOJ throughout the process. So when we reach the point at which we're seeking DOJ approval of a policy, it's usually to iron out any lingering details. This typically is not the first time that they are seeing a draft directive. For all DOJ policies, we must receive DOJ approval to move forward with implementation. In terms of the implementation, yes.
You do have a question from the community member, Fern.
Okay.
Go ahead, Fern.
Trying to find the unmute. I'm surprised. I come out of corporate life, also military, and I'm finding it fascinating. It appears to me as though with a policy that it looks like it is coming from the ground up to the executive, as opposed to what I'm traditionally used to of coming from the executive council, the directors and that sort of thing, with regard to policies. Am I hearing and reading you correctly?
That's an excellent point. I don't think that this graph accurately reflects our engagement with the chief's office. So my team meets on a monthly basis with our chiefs, and it's during those conversations that we're getting their feedback and direction on policies. So it's a little bit of both. We're receiving overarching direction from the chief's office pretty early in the process, and I have a good sense of how they want these policies to look. Sure. But we don't finalize anything without consulting with them again to ensure that we captured their direction. That's an excellent question.
Wonderful, thank you. You helped me out a lot. Thanks.
Thank you for the question. So the last step here, just implementation. What that means for my team, at the end of the process, once the process has completed union review, and again, if it's a DOJ policy has received DOJ approval, we develop a package that we post on our website that includes an executive summary of our review process. So it describes the review of that particular directive, stakeholders that we engaged. We try to address actionable public comments in that summary as well. So why we were able or weren't able to adopt certain recommendations. That package also includes clean and red line versions of the policy. So a clean version of the new finalized policy and a red line version that compares the new policy with the quote unquote old, what would now be the old policy. That package also includes all of the public comments that we received during the review period. So all of that information is available on our website. We'll jump to that. I'll do a little demo of the website here in a moment. I will say at the outset, we've had a lot of problems with the website since we transitioned to the new platform. So I do encourage you to reach out to me if you're trying to access some information and just having a hard time finding it or it's not available. It certainly would not be the first time. We've had several folks reach out with some issues recently. That's the outward facing implementation. Internally, we upload the new directive into our learning management system. That gets disseminated to all members. Every member, sworn and non-sworn, has to sign off on every new directive. That gets uploaded into our learning management system, and members have 30 days to read and acknowledge the directive. Sometimes there may be a training component that accompanies the directive upon release in LMS, but that's generally how the process works internally. Any questions about the process? Okay.
Yes,
I'm
there
going
is
to-
one question from, there's a couple of questions. Go ahead, Barb.
Okay.
Hi, sorry about that, fighting with the microphone button. So I'm thinking about the time it takes from the beginning of the review until you get into the implementation phase and have that finished. So I'm wondering for something that's like, I'm going to say more simple, like if a state law changes or a federal law changes, do you guys then prioritize the relevant directives? And like, can you give me an example of how long something like that would take to go from beginning to end, since you would hope the DOJ wouldn't, have a problem with it if it's state law? Does that make sense as a question, Ashley?
Yes, absolutely. Thank you, Barb. So yes, I would say non-DOJ policies are actually a lot easier to get through the process more quickly. If there's something that requires an immediate change, we have executive orders as a stopgap measure. We try to get things codified in policy as quickly as possible, but executive orders are also an option. Those are issued by the chief's office if there's just an immediate need to address a policy issue. I would say on the shorter end of things, getting a policy through the process in as little as 4 months is not impossible, particularly if there's motivation, right, to update a policy to reflect a change in the law. We can usually get people on board to navigate the process pretty quickly. Does that answer your question?
Absolutely. Thank you, Ashley.
Of course. Kip, I see you have a question.
Yeah, and this might be a longer question / answer than we have time currently allotted, but I'm super curious about the public input process and what your team's I'm going to use the word process again. Process is to read, evaluate, and incorporate or consider incorporation or not consider it. That part of the process seems kind of opaque to me. And case in point, when the first review came out on the body worn camera policies or directives, it was an extremely dense set of policies and processes and everything else. And I found it very challenging to provide coherent feedback. But I did want to capture some feedback in it. But it struck me after I clicked submit, how does the community input get incorporated into the conversations that you have about changes to be made?
Sure. Excellent question, Kev. I will say at the outset, the body worn camera policy is a very different matter than the rest of our policies because, right, it is subject to bargaining between the city and the unions. And so we, in some ways, deviated from our standard process to fulfill the what was necessary or the requirements for that bargaining process. So setting the body worn camera policy aside, in general, when you, and this was the case even with the body worn camera policy, when you submit public comments as an individual or representing a particular group, utilizing our survey process, members of my team are the only folks who have access to those survey results, if you will, that feedback on the directives. We typically take that feedback and analyze it to make a determination about whether or not they're actionable recommendations. So when I say actionable, I mean sometimes we get recommendations like, or comments that might say, what's the point of having body worn cameras if you're not going, nobody's going to be held accountable, right? Well, that's sort of opinion based, and not, going to discuss the merits of that. But there's not really anything actionable that we can do about that recommendation. So we make a determination about what's actionable and what's feasible, and we talk to our chiefs about feedback that we receive. We talk to our subject matter experts to make a determination about whether or not it's possible to change. Are there any operational impacts to potentially making a change that's recommended during that process? And if there is no operational impact, or if the recommendation doesn't cause confusion or whatever, we tend to err on the side of adopting it. And I would encourage folks to look at our executive summaries on our website to sort of see how we address those public comments. But the short answer, Kip, is we receive those comments and recommendations during the public comment period. We read all of them. We don't receive very many, I will say that. I'm a bit discouraged by the absence of, or the lack of participation, both with our members and our inability to reach a broader audience amongst community members. We don't receive many, but we do read every single comment, and where it warrants discussion with internal discussion with our chiefs or other practitioners, we certainly engage in those conversations and try to adopt those recommendations when we can.
Cool, thank you. And yeah, it is a complicated process, so don't want to discuss it here, but we'll probably reach out about maybe improving the engagement process from our perspective. So
sure,
hopefully get more people to be able to provide input. Cool, thank you.
I appreciate that. Byron?
Oh, we'll go with Dr. Allen, and then we'll go to Byron.
I also have a lot of experience from military with writing policies, regulations, and it seemed that the ones I got stuck with were the ones that had to do with our department and other departments. So as opposed to policies that just applied to us internally, I had to be there listening to the Tennessee Valley Authority and various other parts of the government when dealing with whatever it was my boss wanted for our base. And I don't think I heard you talk about interacting with organizations outside of PPB, but surely there must be places where PPB does interact with other organizations, like at an emergency room, and I'm sure there must be a lot of them. So,
yes, Dr. Allen. Oh, I'm sorry, go ahead.
Go ahead. No, I don't have anything new to say. Go on.
First, I heard you reference the Tennessee Valley Authority. I'm from Alabama, so I know what that is. Small world. But yeah, so we do engage with non-governmental entities and other folks who are partners in the work that we do. A couple of concrete examples. We recently worked on a policy that pertains to like detox and handling folks in the management of folks who are intoxicated, citations in lieu of making an arrest, et cetera. And our analysts reached out to local hospitals to Oh, hi, Elizabeth. I recognize you from, sorry, I just saw you up here on camera. I recognize you from we worked on the queer policy together. Good to see you. Way back when, it's been a couple of years now. But I digress. So we have reached out to partners, hospitals on that particular policy. With regard to the queer policy, actually, Directive 64038, we reached out to the Transgender Law Center and provided a draft of our policy. We're currently working with the DA's office on a policy pertaining to premises entry. So we do reach out. When I say stakeholders, I think I maybe oversimplified and used the term very broadly. But we try to identify both partners and individuals and groups who are impacted by those directives to get their perspective as well.
Oh, Dr. Ali, you're on mute.
Somewhere on that chart, you reach out to those outer organizations.
Yes, I would say that that occurs during our executive reconciliation processes.
Oh.
And I will say, this is a lot of information to digest, Dory. I will give you the slide deck, and I have a little one-pager that presents the process as a flow chart. It's a little easier to read. We, of course, have the directive that spells all of this out in narrative form. So I'll send all of those materials to you, Dory, to distribute with the group.
Byron?
Thank you, Frida. Ashley Lancaster, thank you for being here tonight. I really appreciate it. This is very informal and very educational. I have 3 questions, but I'm trying to put them all together into one. So if you could bear with me for a second. You were saying on the objective slide that you have, you don't have to go back to it, but the last one is what caught me. And how is that going? If you can remember that, or maybe not. And the 6-month to 12-month, and a bill going through 8 different processes, has the idea of cutting it down to 4 and still keeping it 6 to 12 months if it takes that long to get it done. And my meaning by that is that you have more meat when it's implemented to the PPB. It may feel like it's a little bit more serious. And you said you know what they're looking for when you writing directives. You kind of know what they're looking for when you're bringing this to them. Can you elaborate a little bit on that?
Sure, Byron, I may ask you to repeat your second question, but starting with the objective slides, I think you're referring to the avoiding disparate outcomes. Is that correct?
I think so.
So, yeah, one of the things that we're doing, and Jill is working on this. I think a good example of something we're doing to specifically address this issue is during the last review of our Directive 10, again, that's the directive that governs our review and development process, we received a comment that challenged us to more meaningfully utilize an equity lens in the development of this work. And so I took that seriously and codified it in that policy, committed my team to utilizing an equity lens, and we're continuing to refine it. But I think one way that we keep that as a primary objective, again, avoiding achieving disparate outcomes with our policy, is by utilizing an equity lens that considers those things, considers the impacted communities, folks who are impacted by particular directives, and anticipates whether or not there's a historical or institutional adverse impact on those communities. And so I think that's a tangible thing that we're doing right now to try to avoid disparate outcomes, is committing to utilizing an equity lens in the development of our policy. I think we still have a little work to do in refining that tool so that it's geared toward the work that we're doing. And of course, the Bureau as a whole has a racial equity plan, and all of the functional areas presumably are doing their work towards that plan. But we wanted to take it a step further and ensure that we're making those considerations with the development where applicable in the development of every policy. So I think that's one way that we're trying to avoid disparate outcomes. Again, I'll need you to repeat your second question, but with regards to your third, I think you asked, how is it that I can kind of anticipate the direction in which the chiefs want us to go with the policy? And I would say that's just experience in working with them and talking to their reporting chains and command staff and having those conversations before we meet with the chiefs. But I have a pretty solid working relationship with all of the chiefs. And again, we meet with them pretty routinely, that you start to anticipate how they're going to react to certain issues and can prepare in that way. Byron, do you want to repeat your second question? I didn't quite catch it.
Oh, I was speaking on the process. You have 8 steps for the process. You have 8 steps, and I was asking, has there ever been thought in cutting that in 4 to having 4 process with the DOJ along the way with it, and also, but you're still taking the 6 months or 12 months or whatever the time that you still need, so it can feel like it's more meatier when you put this directive into play within PPB, so it can be taken more seriously. It can be, you know, I don't know, because it seems like when you have 8 processes, by the time it gets to the end, there's no meat on the bone. If that makes any sense.
I got you. So with all of those steps, if I'm hearing you correctly, just to mirror, are you saying with all those steps, there's the possibility that, you know, with all these stakeholders getting to participate in the process, that the policy effectively just gets stripped and we're left with no meat on the bone? Is that what you're saying?
Yes, ma'am.
Gotcha. You know, I think I'd be a little, I'd have some reservations about cutting steps, right? Because you'd have to decide which steps to cut. I certainly wouldn't want to remove any of the public comment periods. That's 60 days of the process until, right? And you want to give people or the stakeholders a voice, but you also, right, have to bear in mind that there are constraints in place that effectively prevent us from shaving any meat off the bone, if you will. So by that, I mean, there are certain things that we are going to be required to do by state law. There are certain things that we might be required to do at the direction of the police chief or the police commissioner. And so my job, my role in this process is to give people voice and give them an opportunity to weigh in, but to ensure that they're aware of what these other factors are, with the goal of not, we need to have to use your word, a meaty policy. The policy needs to have substance to be meaningful, right? And to hold people accountable. And so I don't know that we've ever considered cutting steps. I think it's just about ensuring that we are staying focused on what the objective and what the direction on a particular policy is to ensure that it does have meat on the bone at the end of the process. Maybe not the most satisfying yet.
And my last thing, I want to give you kudos, because you do put out things for community members to come back and even town halls to speak on things. And so I want to give you kudos on saying that you do your best as you can to give out information out there to the public.
Thank you. I appreciate that, Byron.
Leslie?
Thank you. Yeah, I have 2 questions, but if we are short on time, I can limit to one. The first one, I just want to make sure I understood directly on the directives when they are up for review. It is possible that it's possible that the directive doesn't need to be amended or in your opinion or in the opinion of those that are looking at it for that very first step, it could be that they feel like it doesn't need to be amended in any way, and then they just continue with that directive. Did I understand that correctly, or was
that's a great. I think that doesn't happen too often, Leslie, but one specific example that comes to mind that we just worked on is our policy that governs our work with the Joint Terrorism Task Force, so the FBI task force, that we created that directive in response to a city council resolution. And so that resolution actually prescribed the requirements. It shaped that entire policy. And so that's one that typically doesn't change, largely because it's tied to that city council resolution. And so if council members wanted to go in a different direction with the Bureau's collaboration with the Joint Terrorism Task Force, I think that would probably drive change. But that's one that hasn't changed recently because there hasn't been a shift in the city council's positions. That's just one example. But yes, it's typically unlikely that we will post a policy to not change anything, but it could happen.
Gotcha. And then can I ask my question? My second question? Okay.
Go ahead, Leslie.
Thanks, Frida. So the second question is about the policies that do get, it sounds like it's really based on whether they're up for review, but is there a possibility that it could be community led at any point? And like the community could say, hey, due to a recent change or something like that, this policy should really be looked at, PPB. Has that ever happened?
Yeah, absolutely. I think our process allows for that. That would fall into the category of just other factors that affect when we initiate a review process. The PCCEP recommended that we develop a procedural justice policy a couple of years ago, and that was a policy that was not in existence, and we did in response to that recommendation. So it certainly happens. It can be community driven or driven by other stakeholders, such as the DOJ or, again, police commissioners, city council, et cetera. But the community is certainly an important stakeholder in that regard as well.
Awesome. Thank you for that.
Sure.
I'm good. Thanks.
All right, excellent. Barb and Dan, we're going to take your questions, but actually I wanted to check in with you. You still wanted to show the process, correct?
Yeah, I know that in the lead up to this meeting, Dory had mentioned that there was just some confusion about the process and where to find information. So I was going to utilize some time to just go to our website and show folks how to access that information. I'll defer to you on how you want to proceed.
Yeah, let's go ahead and take these two questions, and then after that, we'd love to see that process.
Okay.
All right, Barb.
Hi, y'all. So I put in the chat something that I think is true, that directives that have to do with the settlement agreement, that's one of your superpowers as PCCEP. You can ask for it to be reviewed, like not on cycle kind of thing, I believe. Maybe Sarah or somebody can put it in the chat to make sure I didn't make that up. And this might go, Ashley, to what you're about to do, but I was going to ask for like a specific example of, this directive, was affected by this comment from a community member or whatever. And I'm pretty sure that where you're going to go, you're going to show us where to find that for all of them. But I wasn't sure. So I was just wanted to make sure that happened. Does that make sense?
So I'll defer to Sarah for your first question. But I don't know, Barb, that I was going to cover that. My plan was to just go to our website to show folks how to access our directives. I can show you where the executive summaries are located if that's what you're referencing, but the summaries that I mentioned earlier that speak to the changes that we made to a particular policy and why we did or didn't adopt recommendations. Is that what you're referencing, Barb?
Yeah, it is.
Okay. Yeah, I can show you access.
Because it doesn't make sense for you to encourage people to give recommendation or comments and suggestions. I don't know if we're going to call them recommendations for things that are completely outside of, what would be expected, if that makes sense. or what would be feasible, I guess is a better way to say that.
Yeah, I hear you. Sarah, do you want to speak to the first part of Barb's question with regard to PCEP's ability to, I mean, I think we acknowledge in our Directive 10 our ability to review a policy outside of the review schedule, but I don't know if there's anything in the settlement agreement or any other governing document that speaks to Barb's point about the PCEP's authority, for the lack of a better.
It got answered in the chat for me, Ashley.
Okay.
Yeah, I
Okay,
just
perfect.
chat under the PCEP plan, which is approved by the council. PCEP can identify and make a request for out of cycle review of some of the key policies. And I don't know that they've ever exercised that authority because, I mean, as you know, the DOJ related policies do come up on a regular basis, but it is in the plan, which was authorized and is incorporated into the settlement agreement as an order of the court.
Thank you, Sarah. And I think to piggyback off of that, I will say we encourage folks, if you see a problem with an existing policy and perhaps it's not under review, we encourage folks to reach out to us. And even if we aren't able to address it immediately, we do file it away for when we are able to take up that particular policy. So that's always an option. And what I didn't really touch on during my presentation, but I've talked to Dory offline about this. You know, we have those two designated public comment periods, but that executive reconciliation period has some flexibility to it that will allow us to potentially meet with PCEP subcommittees or the full committee to talk about policies that are of interest to your group. And so even if it's outside of that review schedule, or if we're unable to coordinate it so it falls within the public comment period, I'm happy to attend PCEP meetings to talk about a particular policy that's either currently under review or one for which you're interested in weighing in on. I'll throw that out there as well.
Dan?
Thanks. You know what? I have my camera hooked up from a meeting for earlier today, so I'm going to use my camera. Thank you. Ms. Lancaster, I'm really glad to have the opportunity to talk to you every once in a while in person. You know, Portland Cop Watch is a very frequent contributor to those comments. In fact, I don't know where your count came from of 140 plus 40, but we've made comments on 137 policies and declined to comment on 37 of them. So I think there are more than 180 total, but I may be wrong. In any case, well, I'm going to try to get to my points as quickly as possible. You talked about looking to best practices. In some cases, the city can create the best practices. Like the Police Executive Research Forum suggested that officers not do pre-review of their body camera footage in deadly force incidents until they give a statement, and that comes from Portland's policy. So it's a very big deal. So we can set the standard sometimes. There's a problem with the continuum of force being removed, but then several policies say the officer should not resort to a higher level of force. Now, I don't know as a community member what's the next higher level of force. How do you know what the next higher level of force is? So I think that, you know, there's got to be some in-between ground that has a list like that. That's not saying you have to use this or that, or you can't use this or that. Although there should be some prohibitions, and there are some prohibitions on what level of force you can use in certain circumstances. I think you sort of hinted at the LGBTQ plus directive. That's a good example of where, you know, the Bureau could reach out to specific organizations in the community that work on those issues when you know that's coming up for review, and maybe you did that, I don't know. But I think that's, you know, that's the kind of thing where you can, instead of trying to cast a wide net, like be focused and reach out on specific policies. I really want to thank the Bureau. So people who don't know, the policies that used to come out, they would put the proposed changes forward without a red line version, and it took years of us complaining about it for them to finally put it in. And I'm worried sometimes that they think because Portland Cop Watch is making the comments that it's somehow nefarious, but actually ended up helping everybody, I think, to see that. And more recently, they're now adding, and if you ever get a chance to see the website if I shut up, they've now added little paragraphs saying, we're reviewing this policy because of, and then they list some reasons that they're looking at it. And that's really helpful too. That's a really helpful new addition. I want to really acknowledge those responses, even though sometimes they take a long time to get enacted. the executive order that was referenced, there was one executive order that came out that was the one that allowed them to delay the release of officer names from 1 day to 15 days, and that got changed back again to 14 days recently due to state law, I think. But that's very problematic to bypass public input. So if an executive order comes out, my hope would be that that gets released to the public for comment as soon as possible, so that bad policies don't get put in executive orders and just sit there. And finally, the Joint Chairman Task Force policy is one that's very near and dear to my heart. And we've been recommending for a while that, yes, the resolution from the City Council says this is what is supposed to be in the annual reports, but that doesn't mean the Bureau can't add to it. And in fact, all the people who've come and given those reports have talked about cases that the Portland Police sent to the FBI, which is not required by the resolution. I think that can be codified without violating the resolution. Can you speak to that specific question? Thank you.
Okay, Dan, thank you so much. I'll run down your commentary really quick and then quickly and then get to your JTTF comment. I 180, that was ballpark, but thank you for holding me accountable. Give or take 10, we'll say. With regard to the queer policy, well, I'll go in order. I think you spoke to the pre-review and perf commenting on that. You're right. I think that there are opportunities for us, and when we're assessing how other jurisdictions are engaging in certain practices, there are certainly opportunities for us to improve upon that. So I appreciate your acknowledgement there. The higher level of force and potential value of a continuum, and we can have an offline discussion about that one. That's kind of an in the weeds conversation that we can discuss in more detail, but just in the interest of time, we'll put a pin in that one. The queer policy, we worked with the Alliance for Safer Communities and again, reached out to the Transgender Law Center. We looked at the National Center for Transgender Equality. We worked with the city's LGBTQIA2S+ analysts as well. So we did a fair amount of outreach through the city's analysts. We're able to connect with, I think it's called the Cascade Project, and maybe the Q Center as well. So there are quite a few community organizations that we were able to connect with on the development of that policy. And I think it's a really solid example of how this all could work. Red line copies, we attribute that entirely to Portland Cop Watch. Thank you for nudging us. It's a good practice that benefits everyone, including our members as well, who now have a clear understanding of what exactly changes. So that and the recent practice that you noted, Dan, we're now including just a brief paragraph when we post policies for public comment on the reason behind the review. So I appreciate your acknowledgement there. I agree with you on the executive order piece, in that we wouldn't want to, if we're going to change a policy, we don't necessarily want to bypass the public comment period, but there's certainly some changes, that operational issues that have immediate operational impact that require a quicker process to change the policy in place. And I think that's why the Bureau doesn't utilize the executive order function that often, to ensure that we do have a more robust process when we're contemplating policy changes, but I think there's certainly a place for executive orders. With regard to the JTTF, that's kind of a tricky issue. I think that, yes, we perhaps could expound upon the resolution. I don't know that in conversations with our internal team that there has been a need to recognize, or a recognition of a need to change that policy. And so I'm happy to talk more about that one offline with you, Dan, if you'd like. But again, just in the interest of time, I'd say, we can't adopt all recommendations. We consider them, and for certain reasons don't adopt everything, but we do appreciate you weighing in on all of the policies and providing just valuable insight and perspective on our review process. Thank you. All right, do I have time really quickly to just try to do a very brief demo? I won't take as much time as I was planning to take. Is that okay?
Yeah, I think really quick. We probably don't have too much time for Q&A, but I think a quick tutorial run through of the website is a good idea.
Gotcha. Okay. I'm going to try to share my screen again. Let's see. I can find. Oh, let's see. Oh, here we go. Okay, are you able to see my screen? Looks like it's a
Yes.
yes.
Yes, we can.
Okay. Excellent. Thank you. So this is the police directives homepage. You can access this by searching for, if you go to the search engine on the website, city's website, if you search police, hopefully this will continue to share while I do this and we're navigating away from this page. Bear with me. Are you still able to see that?
Yes.
Excellent. Thank you. So you can search for police or access the police bureau through the topics listed here. I just searched for police. It will take you to the police bureau's homepage, which has all of this information pertaining to various issues. If you continue to scroll down, you'll see a link to our policies and procedures, and that takes you back to the page that I started on. So all of our policies are listed here. These are all links that link to the directives. If you're trying to access the policy for the purposes of making a comment during the public comment period, you will look here to first universal review or second universal review to see if we have any directives that are posted. And Dan, I know you emailed me the other day about the automatic email notification that goes out when we post that function has been down. I haven't gotten any feedback on whether or not that issue has been resolved, but I plan to follow up with the city's IT person next week. So hopefully we'll get that resolved as soon as possible. But ordinarily, you could sign up to receive email notifications when we do post policies for universal review, and that will ping you to let you know that those policies are available. But you access that page. These are all of the directives that are currently under the first universal review period. You click on the directive. This is what Dan was referencing, the description explaining why we are reviewing a particular policy. So clicking on secondary employment as an example, it will take you to the directive. So this is the first universal review, therefore this is the current policy that's in place. We're asking you to weigh in on our current practices. This is the directive. You scroll to the bottom, it tells you here, there's a provide feedback here link at the bottom of the page. You click on that and it sends you to a survey. And I think my screen is still sharing. So this is the SurveyMonkey survey where you just write a narrative form, your feedback on that policy. Really quickly, not to take too much time, we'll go back to this tab. Barb, I want to make sure I show you where the executive summaries are located. So this executive summary archive page houses all of the executive summaries. I will say here, full disclosure, I do not like the way this site is set up. It's difficult to navigate. They're not listed in chronological order. They used to be listed in chronological order on our old platform. That's not the case here. So it's less intuitive. It's a little difficult to navigate, but all of our summaries are located here. And we've had some issues with uploading recent documents as well. So there's still some kinks that we need to work out with the new platform, but in theory, you can access all of our executive summaries using that executive summary archive page. Any questions?
That was wonderful.
Thank you, Byron. I appreciate that. And Dory, again, I'm happy to send the slide deck to you and the flow chart and answer questions offline. I'll throw my contact information in the chat as well.
Awesome, thank you.
That sounds great. Yeah, I think that slide deck would be greatly appreciated. And I think we're definitely looking forward to connecting with you further, Ashley. Thank you so much for the presentation and all of the answers you provided. Okay, PCCEP, really quick, I think we're gonna move into our next item here. Just so we can touch base on that before wrapping up tonight. So I think because our full committee meeting got canceled last month due to like we were talking at the beginning of the meeting, just lots of illness, unfortunately. We're gonna try to get the ball rolling really quick on this in this meeting. So I'm gonna skip ahead a couple slides. Let's go to this one. So yeah, I think in this meeting, what would be most productive is probably for you PCCEP members to just identify who is interested in joining a work group in support of the codification effort. I've laid out what potentially some process steps could look like to help give you an idea. But we're going to be collaborating with the mayor's office and the city attorneys on this process as well. So I think, you know, this, unlike, you know, some other projects you've taken up recently, like for example, the bylaws, I don't expect this to be as labor intensive for those considering supporting this group because it's just a much shorter, you know, piece of text really, and then also the text is gonna be, as far as like what exactly it says, is gonna be a collaborative process. I did include a draft code from 2022 that was never moved on in the previous slides. That's what we breezed through there, so ultimately probably something short. But yeah, that's my spiel. Co-chairs, do you have anything on this? Because my proposal is that you identify who is interested in being on a work group. That's my proposal.
I'll second your proposal. Yeah, no, I think I know that we don't have a full committee here, but yeah, I think driving it from our perspective makes sense, and we can look for volunteers that are here from PCCEP, and then also email the full committee and see who else wants to be involved.
Yes, absolutely. Any other PCCEP members here have questions about this process or anything that might inform you being a part of this work group?
Sorry, I had a question about so sorry, would this work group be led through the settlement and policy subcommittee, or you know, or that sort of irrelevant, it's just whoever wants to be?
Yeah, we're the only reason that we kind of put it this evening is this was, as
Yeah.
you know, yeah, it's just from that rescheduled meeting. And so I think just in the interest of time, trying to get the ball rolling tonight. But this work group, I think you could just see it as sort of an ad hoc, you know, work group on this subject only, independent of the subcommittees, or however you want to do it, really.
Yeah. Excuse me. Yeah, because I see like, I think there's a little bit of sense of urgency, and I know we've talked about this a little bit of like, yeah, and urgency might be a stronger word, but you know, just that the city is going to change in less than a year, city governance, and just, you know, those growing pains that we'll have to go through. And it feels like if we can get something solid, at least definitely passed by PCCEP by the end of the summer, is kind of what I was thinking. And yeah, we can work this out with the work group. But and then so thinking about process a little bit, I feel like we will want to have some discussion and maybe talk with partners and get some sort of, you know, input from community, but also maybe some community organizations. And so we could just talk about fitting those in at different agendas. Like it doesn't have to be a full committee, or it could be one of these subcommittees where we're putting something on the agenda like, hey, we want to get some clarification here so that we can, move forward with this thought that the work group has. Yeah. Can we look at it that way? And
Yeah, I think that's totally fine.
Well, I'd love to be on this work group. Been saving my extra ad hoc time for this, so
cool.
Not for anything else, yeah.
Sarah, you had something?
Hi, yeah, I just wanted to say that I stand ready to help you with any of the drafting that you would like. And, I just, after listening to, there have been a couple runs at this. Obviously, the PCCEP proposed a new PCCEP plan with the goal of codification back in September of 2021. We still have the existing PCCEP plan. We had another interactive process in 2022 where the mayor proposed a plan, got feedback from PCCEP, did a little bit of iterative, and we kind of proposed that. And that's when the one-page codification that I think Dory has shared was proposed. But, you could do a first universal review, a sort of, what do you guys think? What do you like about these existing things? What not? Get that feedback to me. I could take it a stab at rewriting it and send it out for the second universal review. I mean, so I stand ready to help and make this as easy for you all to get your feedback into this. And then, the mayor, who has been in support of codification since I think 2020, would then take it to council to get it approved, and we would have to run the PCCEP plan revision by the Albina Ministerial Alliance Coalition and by the Mental Health Alliance. And I mean, there's some steps that have to be done because that is part of the settlement agreement. But I stand ready to help you get this all through with the best public input and input from you all and the least labor on your part. So that's my promise to you, to help you with this.
Yeah, appreciate that, Sarah. I know one thing we've been talking about is what PCCEP should be focusing the members and getting input is like that high level, those concrete core ideas, and then, working with you and the city to help us put it into like actual language that would then be adopted. And I know that's, that'll be later in the process. So I just still say to the rest of the PCCEP members, I don't think this is like, and Dory even noted it, it's not like bylaws. Like this is something where we can, we have a good template already. And we can kind of throw in some, maybe more innovative ideas if that comes out of the work group. But like the language part, we don't need, we'll worry about it when we want to review it and all that, but we don't have to speak the language to create a city code because I know it's very specific.
Yeah, I think that's right, Ashley. Any other questions from PCCEP members before we move on this?
Well, just to answer Barb's question in the chat, there is community involved, and yes, we'll definitely go through the regular PCCEP channels to open it up for community input. That'll certainly be part of the process.
For sure. Okay, PCCEP members, so could we I guess just by show of hands or in some way signal if you're interested in joining this work group? Cool. All right. Oh, awesome.
How many folks do we need?
Honestly, I don't think that we really need to limit it.
I just wouldn't want too many because that always gets,
Yeah, I hear you for sure. I think, we'll cross that bridge if it becomes a concern. But we will offer the opportunity to folks who aren't in this meeting, but most PCCEP members are here tonight. So yeah, it's a good thing to keep in mind. But I think 4 is a great number to start with, and if we pick up another 1 or 2, especially because not everyone can always make every meeting and that kind of thing. So I think that's a a solid 4 is a really, really great place to start. Cool. Thank you guys for volunteering, and I think, yeah, we're in a super solid place and ready to get started with this. So
Yeah, thanks, Dari.
excellent. Alrighty. Any last questions or comments about this subject? Okay. All right, I think we are ready for open public comment.
So yeah, this is open public comment. If you have any comments around what items have been discussed today, or what would you like to see PCEP work on, or any other topics, this is the time. Dr. Allen.
I'd like clarification about the role boundary confusion question. So supposing the American Psychological Association decided they didn't like the way PSR was being handled, if they filed a ballot measure to substantially change PSR, let's say they wanted to have licensed clinicians on those teams, the way to shut up PCEP is to file and then start to collect signatures, and PCEP would be cut out of the conversation.
It feels like a Sarah answer.
PCEP cannot comment on current political activities as in their official capacity. So yes, I mean, they cannot advocate for or against a ballot measure. So I think that's, you're characterizing it as they're cut out of the conversation. I'm not really sure that's. They don't have to get the signatures and be sure they're on the ballot before we cannot comment. No, the political activity in the under state law is defined as starting once they file with the elections office. Okay, that's clear. That's the right line. Yeah.
Stephanie, did you want to add anything to that?
No, I was just going to say, and it's, it's for all public officials. So PCEP just happens to fall within that definition.
Dan?
Oh, thank you. Oh, let me turn my camera back on again. Again, Dan Handelman, he, him from Portland Cop Watch, and I appreciated all the discussions you had today. I'm looking forward to the discussion around the codification and to see how simple that language can actually be and keep your group around after the DOJ leaves, which is the main point of codifying it. And the DOJ agreement was almost completely done in 2020 until the protests happened. So it has been a long time coming. There are a couple of comments I didn't get to make about the director's process, but you probably saw on the screen there are 6 that are up now that are due for comments by the end of this month. So I don't know if you're gonna have time to look at those and review them and comment on them. I was very glad that Ms. Lancaster brought up that archives page because it is just terrible. And it's I don't understand why they don't just archive them on their own website instead of putting them in this other place that's really hard to navigate, even harder to navigate. One of the things that she talked about was that there's a directive that says not to engage in minor traffic stops, but my understanding is that some parts of the Bureau, like the focus intervention team, might still be doing that, even though there's an overall policy and kind of direction from the chief not to do that. I'm also going to mention that I'm bothered by referring to the police as an industry because it's not really an industry. I mean, they're public servants. There's nothing they're manufacturing. Kind of like when they talk about customer service. It's not like people going to the police store to buy stuff. And as a little fun experiment, I went through as much of the transcript as I could from tonight's meeting, and found the different ways that the transcript tried to understand when you're saying the letters PCCEP as PCEP. And here are 5 different ways that it came up with it. And this is why I always try to tell you that it's probably better to say PCCEP, because otherwise people have no idea what you're talking about. Yeah, in Portland Cop Watch, it does put a lot of comments about these. I don't know if this work group's intent is to have meetings about the specific policies that are for review, but we'd be very happy to have conversations about it. And it is indeed a superpower if the Bureau is offering to come back to you after the other public comment is cut off to let you weigh in on it after those periods are over, because we don't get to do that, right? My last comment really is that the Police Association gets to do that by contract, but that doesn't mean they can't weigh in along the way. I mean, it's just, if they want community support as an organization, they should weigh in publicly and let us know what their concerns are, so we can work on ways that we can all benefit together. Thank you.
All right. Thank you, Dan. Barb?
Hi, couple of comments. One is y'all run, don't walk to get that codification done, because who knows who the next mayor is going to be and what their attitude is going to be about PCEP. So if it's codified, it's in there and a lot harder to get rid of. And Wheeler at least has, come online for the codification. So it's almost more important for it to get codified somehow than not codified at all, in my humble opinion, as a community member. Speaking of that, I'm not sure I'm familiar with that 1-page codification thing that Dory said she sent out. And so I'm wondering if that's public record and can be shared if it's going to be used. But if not, then never mind. And I don't need an answer. I just want to suggest that action. And those are my 2 main ones for tonight. Thank you, everybody. Great conversations.
I can just reply to that, Barb. That's a reference document. It is a public record. It's on the PCEP website from 2022, but I think PCEP's going to use that as a reference document to make the, I guess for reference. I'm not sure what they'll do with it, but I think they're going to make their own new thing. But yeah, that is on the PCEP website.
Okay, thank you. Which is, the website is improving. It's just still a little annoying.
Thank you, Barb. Vince?
Yep, good. Thank you, Chair, for thank you for calling on me. My name is Vince Jones-Dixon. I am the chair of Trust Lab, and I also serve on City Council in the city of Gresham. And I just wanted to put on your radar. I know our founder of Trust Lab has been in conversation with one of the co-chairs. We have invited Bishop John Rukiana. He is he's a former president of the Unity and Reconciliation Commission in Rwanda, and this year marks the 30-year anniversary since the genocide that happened, where over 1 million Tutsis or Rwandese were murdered and killed over the course of 90 days. Over the last 2 years, we've been reviewing your guys' recommendation around the Truth and Reconciliation Commission, and we've been doing work with various leaders across the nation to learn more and figure out how do we apply that same context or apply that here and move forward with that here in Portland. So I'm just here to extend the invitation to participate in some of the conversations that will be taking place the first week of April. And I can follow up with an email to send more information. And the conversation has been great this evening. Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you.
Thank you, Vince. And yeah, the co-chairs and the chairs, I see the head nods and the appreciations for that invitation. And yeah, bring that here. Thank you.
We will get that set up.
Can I just ask, is Vince, are you is this work you're doing for the city, or where does the work come from? Just curious.
Yeah, no, this work is primarily through Trust Lab. So I serve on the board and I've helped develop the framework over the last 2.5 years. And last year I invited Bishop John here, and he's helped inform some of the work that I've led in my position as a city councilor, but that's completely separate.
Got it.
Yes, good question.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. I think it's coming back to me now, so thank you.
Yeah,
Appreciate
you're welcome.
you. Yeah.
Ashley?
My hand was up about if no, there's no other community hands up. I just also wanted to ask a clarifying question around the boundaries around what I guess PCCEP can advocate for, and just and maybe it's a conversation for later, but just around out of the settlement, I think it's paragraph 195. I was kind of reviewing it throughout the meeting and just kind of jogging my memory there around that, what that points out, which is it refers to the ballot measure, to the new accountability system. And so it just feels like I don't know, it kind of feels like there's a little wrinkle in like us having this boundary for, I get not advocating for specific candidates and positions, but at the same time, we're supposed to be, supporting the settlement and supporting that sort of connection to the community. And this feels like, this kind of feels like a place where there's ambiguity around what PCCEP can be advocating for when it comes to settlement, but then also, so here's this other measure this petition trying to be passed through. And I'm not saying like we should come in our meetings and say, don't vote for, don't sign that, but how do we advocate for what's in the settlement? And I see Jared has your hand up, so maybe that's where I'll get our question answered.
Thanks, Ashley. Yeah, I was a little confused by the guidance you received too. And I don't know anything about state law, and I'm not going to comment on state law. I do know that, federal law is supreme, and there's a federal court order that does, the city has agreed to allow PCCEP to make recommendations about the settlement agreement. And you can make those to city council or the chief of police, and you can make them to the Department of Justice, and you can certainly comment to the court about the settlement agreement. That paragraph you mentioned is interesting because it does codify the 2020 ballot measure in the settlement agreement, which again is a federal court order. And that's something the parties agreed to resolve our notice of noncompliance. And I believe the Portland Police Association consented, or they're pretty clearly not objecting, and they allowed that provision to become part of the settlement agreement. So the city is obliged to implement that paragraph. Of course, the parties are free to amend it. So if the city wants to amend it, if that's something that the city can propose to the Department of Justice, and then we would need the court to approve it, because any part of the settlement agreement has to be approved as fair, adequate, and reasonable by the court. And so Judge Simon will, typically holds a fairness hearing, and he did this in April of 2022. In which, as part of our the parties agreed accountability remedy, again with the consent or the non-objection of the Portland Police Association, we agreed to implement the 2020 ballot measure. So, I think there's a lot of interesting questions. Obviously nothing is ripe until something changes. But as of now, I think that from my perspective and the perspective of the Department of Justice, the city's obliged to implement paragraph 195. And as part of that, I know there's obligations to bargain under state law, which we accept. And I think that process is ongoing. So I appreciate you raising that clarification. I welcome any, recommendations the PCCEP has or community, wants PCCEP to make in relation to the settlement agreement. And the settlement agreement certainly touches on issues of accountability generally and specifically in paragraph 195. Thanks for raising that.
Can I just also say, I know we're about out of time, but thank you for adding that, Jared. And I do just want to underscore that this is not an issue unless it gets on the ballot and unless it gets passed by voters. So we are, at the city are still working toward the settlement agreement as it exists. It is an interesting legal question about, if a ballot initiative related to this passed by voters, we would be interesting territory in figuring out how to navigate that. But nothing has changed on the course of where we are with the existing requirements of the settlement agreement. And obviously we will continue to be in touch with all of you as those, those things move forward.
I'm feeling a smidge of confusion, and if I am, I'm going to assume it's possible PCEP members might be. So I'm just going to ask one clarifying question about the different pieces of advice we received about. So I know there's a future insight where there will be resolution about if a ballot measure passes, but in this current period, wanting to appropriately advise PCCEP on how they should act around this. I am feeling a bit of confusion about the different things we've heard in this meeting.
Can I think this is how I would, my advice, and I'm not your advice lawyer. I'm a lawyer, but I'm not here in a role as an advisory lawyer. But when I think about the position that myself as a public official or any public official that falls under the state law, it's, I think that PCCEP absolutely can talk about the themes and the issues and the things that are relevant to the settlement agreement. I think it just begins to get different when if PCCEP or myself or any public official begins to start advocating to, as Ashley was saying, vote yes for this or vote no for this, then we're in a different situation. And that's a separate issue from the settlement agreement, right? So the settlement agreement doesn't dictate what state law is. That's why I say, as Jared raised, we'd be in interesting territory. But I think for purposes of this, the state law that Sarah was referring to is about the ethics laws in the state of Oregon and how public officials are allowed to engage and advocate when there is either a candidate or an issue that has begun, the ballot process. So that may not have helped anything, but I think, I guess I would say, let's maybe pull these things apart because they're not exactly intertwined in that way. And again, as Jared also said, it's, whether or not it changes anything about the settlement agreement is something that is not right. We won't know that for a while, but as of right now, because we know that this is on the ballot, the issue of a PCCEP member as a public official behaving in accordance with state ethics laws is, I think, something that everyone here is interested in making sure that we're following.
Yeah, and just to tail end that, I think it'd be helpful to understand. I mean, if we're going to invite the PPA to have a discussion and walk them through their thought process on making this ballot measure proposal, I mean, I would feel like it would be within our purview to ask critical questions or critical path questions about A, B, C, D without saying, yeah, we fully support this or we don't. So I think figuring out how to navigate that would be really, really helpful. Because it doesn't make sense to have a sterile conversation about something somebody could read online. That's all I had on that part. So, but yeah, it'd be nice to get some clarification and maybe we, the attorneys need to have some conversations about it. So.
Alrighty, any final comments or questions for the evening?
always, Dory, but in there.
All right, well, I guess they'll have to wait. All right, just want to remind everyone again that PCCEP is currently recruiting. If you know anyone who you think would be great for PCCEP, if you think you would be, we would love to receive your application. I think we'll put that in the chat again and spread the word. Yeah, and our next meeting is going to be on March 20th. That'll be here at the I'm here at the Portland building, hybrid. And that meeting will feature some presentations from the settlement agreement amici, AMAC and MHA, the Albino Ministerial Alliance Coalition, and the Mental Health Alliance. So we're going to learn a bit more from those groups and take care of some other committee business as well. Yeah, so join us on the 20th for some food and discussion. We'd love to see you. And then the 27th for the Portland Street Response Town Hall. More info on that to come your way. Co-chairs, any final comments?
Thank you for everybody who's still here for sticking it out.
Yes, thank you for all. Well ran, Dorian and Frida. I appreciate you guys. Thank you.
Yeah, and just to note, it is March 20th. So if you're reading the slide, it's March 20th.
Yes, it's February.
Oh, instead of February.
Thanks for
And my mic's on. Sorry about that.
All right, everyone. Well, with that, thank you again to everybody for coming out tonight. Thank you to our chairs, our PCCEP members, our facilitator, Afrida, Ashley Lancaster for that great presentation, and all of our accessibility support. And with that, it is 8:08 p.m. and this meeting is adjourned.
Thank you, everybody.
Thanks, everyone. Good night.
Thank you.